Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. All right, let's get to the last little topic in college football from the weekend. And yeah. Did you see what happened in Austin, Texas on Saturday? And I'm not talking about Shaka Smart being a competent basketball coach all of a sudden. I'm, of course, talking about Saturday morning, Tom Herman out, Steve Sarkisian in one of the most shocking, at least for me, coup d'etats that we have seen in college football in a long time. And it was kind of crazy, right? Because I don't know about the rest of you guys. First of all, I don't claim to be some Texas football insider, but we saw a few weeks ago that Urban Meyer was pursued by the school, that he wasn't interested. And at that point, it kind of felt like, okay, you go, you swing for the fence, you swing for the white whale, Urban Meyer. If you don't get him, you stick with Tom Herman. He really hasn't been that bad. And are you really going to pay him $20 million, him and his staff, to go away? And so it's quiet. There's nothing going on. And all of a sudden, Saturday morning, I'm just on social media, log off. I get a text from my intern, Zach, who basically just says, Texas football emoji eyes, and I flip back on, and immediately I see just the chaos. And again, it was incredible not only that Tom Herman was fired with essentially nobody really on the national scene knowing, but on top of that, having the next head coach in place, Steve Sarkisian, who, oh, by the way, was coaching in the college football playoff a day before. And so let's get into the hire a little bit, because I'll be honest. If you listen to this show, you know that last week when Auburn hired Brian Harsin, I admit it. Like, at first I was kind of and then the more that I thought about it, the more that I was like, okay, this actually makes sense. I can actually get behind this. And in a lot of ways, that is how I feel about the Texas Tom Herman firing for Steve Sarkisian hiring. To any Texas fan that's listening, I'm not going to lie. At first glance, I was kind of like, really? You fired Tom Herman to get Steve Sarkisian? But I think the more that I thought about it, the more that I talked to smart people, the more that I did my homework, the more that I actually think it's a really, really, really good move for Texas. And I really think if they're ever going to catch, just let's start with Oklahoma. Forget Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, who we just talked about a minute ago, and just focus on Oklahoma in the Big 12. If this was really the move that they were going to if that's really the move that they want, start with Oklahoma, then get to everybody else. I do think they needed to make a move, and I do think they made the right move. And I think it does start with Tom Herman, because I do think that myself, like a lot of you, as I just said a minute ago, listen, I don't live in Austin. I don't eat, sleep, and breathe Texas football. I follow it. I cover it. I talk to people around it. But when I looked at the Tom Herman era, say 48 to 72 hours ago, I kind of said, like, look, kind of what I just said about Brian Kelly a minute ago. Two things can be true. He's not the answer long term. He's not the guy that's going to get them to that elite level, but he's not terrible either, right? Like 7-3 this year in a pandemic, should have been 8-3 because they didn't play Kansas, won 10 games a few years ago. This guy's really not that bad. Then I started looking into it on Saturday, and while he still wasn't awful, I don't know that he was that great either. First of all, just looking at this season, yes, you go 7-3 overall. Yes, it should have been 8-3. But let's look at who he beat. First of all, he lost to the two best teams in the conference by far. He lost to Iowa State and Oklahoma, the two teams that ended up playing for the Big 12 championship game. So that's one. He lost to a bad TCU team. And it kind of continued trends that have been going on that I didn't realize. First of all, the guy is great as an underdog in big games, but he is terrible as a favorite. And I don't know that I realized this until I saw he was actually fired on Saturday morning. Did you know that Tom Herman, in his time at Texas, 4 seasons, never won more than 3 games in a row at any point in his time at Texas? That stat blew me away. And even if you look at that 10-win season, which resulted in the Sugar Bowl win where Sam Ehlinger said, "We're back." If you look at that season, they still had 4 losses. They still lost to, outside of Georgia, the best teams on their schedule. And so when you look at it from that framework and you look at it from where things are now and where they are going forward, I'm not sure that this guy had very many answers. First of all, you're going to lose Sam Ehlinger, who I think was frankly kind of a little bit overrated, but he was the face of the organization, franchise, program, whatever. You did lose a bunch of other really, really talented pieces, and there's really no real reason to think that things are going to get better. I was kind of stunned when I saw this. So Texas, in this most recent recruiting cycle, finished with the 17th ranked recruiting class in all of college football. That is behind schools, by the way, like North Carolina, Tennessee. No, we got a lot of Tennessee fans that listen to this show, but there is no reason that you should ever be ranked at Texas outside of the top 10, the top 15, unless you have like 5 scholarships to give. Like, you should dominate recruiting, and instead Texas was the opposite. Not only were they the 17th ranked recruiting class nationally, but how about this? Of the top 25 recruits in the state of Texas, you know how many Texas signed in this recruiting cycle? They signed one of them. One of the top 25 recruits in the state of Texas was committed to Texas in this 2021 recruiting class. That's not good. And on top of that not being good, you know who is coming in and dominating that state? Everybody else. Alabama has 5 of the top 25 ranked recruits in the state of Texas committed to Alabama. Not a good sign for the future of Texas football, with the idea that Alabama is coming into your state and getting guys. LSU is coming into your state and getting guys. Ohio State, Garrett Wilson, wide receiver stud. He is a guy from Texas who is at Ohio State this year. I believe Baron Browning, their best linebacker, is from the state of Texas. Not good when everybody else is coming in, let alone the fact that Texas A&M, which just won the Orange Bowl, has 6 of the top 25 players committed in the state of Texas. So you're coming off a recruiting class where you have one of the top 25 players in the state of Texas committed, and there's no reason to think it was going to get better in 2022, right? First of all, you had the number 1 quarterback in the country committed. He decommits, is now going to Ohio State. But on top of that, all the fans and all the parents and all the players know, bro, you're on the hot seat, Tom Herman. No disrespect, but we saw the reports. We know the school went after Urban Meyer, and we know that if they don't fire you this year, they're going to fire you next year. So it's hard to imagine the scenario where any of the elite recruits in 2022 decide to go play for Tom Herman in Texas. I would say on top of that, I heard some really awful stories about kind of just the way he treated people. And I'm not here to sit here and say, oh, college football, like it's all kumbaya and everybody's best friends. Like, I'm guessing, Nick Saban isn't roasting marshmallows in the backyard with his players. But, I heard stories, and give credit to the folks at 24/7 Sports who cover Texas all the time. Chip Brown, who broke this story. Taylor Estes, who I actually had on my radio show on Saturday. But she was telling stories about how, Tom Herman would see players in the facility and wouldn't make eye contact with them, wouldn't say hello to them. The way he burned bridges with a lot of his former assistant coaches. And so when you factor all that in, that it wasn't going in the right direction, that even though you went 7-3, you didn't really beat anybody of substance, I kind of think maybe it was the best for everybody, not just for Texas, by the way, but how about Tom Herman, who gets $15 million to go sit on the sidelines, maybe go work for ESPN next year, think about what went wrong, try to figure it out, and he will get another head coaching job at some point, and just be better at the next spot. So I get why it was done. I get why it happened. And now I think the second question becomes why Steve Sarkisian was the right guy. And when I look at this situation, I think it's actually pretty simple. Like I said, first of all, I was not crazy excited about the hire when it first happened. And the first reason was, Steve Sarkisian had his issues at USC. And I'm not here to say that anybody would be perfect at Texas. Even Urban Meyer comes with his own issues. But obviously, look, Steve Sarkisian had some troubles off the field, substance abuse issues, all that stuff. And I would say on a very serious note, I hope he's okay. I hope he's moved past it. But at first I was kind of worried, and I kind of thought about it like, dude, is this guy ready for the pressure cooker that is Texas football? But when I heard him kind of talk about his experience at USC, and I'll say this too, I live in LA. People don't think of USC as one of these crazy, ravenous fan bases like an SEC fan base, like in Oklahoma, like a Texas, like in Ohio State. I'm telling you, USC fans are cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, okay? Love them, respect them. They think they should be where Ohio State and Clemson is. I don't necessarily think they are wrong, but USC is I would argue as much pressure as Texas is, or any job is. On top of that, never forget, Steve Sarkisian was a link to the glory days under Pete Carroll. So it's not as though he hasn't dealt with pressure before. Not to say he'll handle it perfectly at Texas. I don't know that anybody will. But I do believe that he's grown. I do believe that he's matured. And I think beyond that, I think he kind of understands what he did wrong to lead him to the situation that he ended up with at USC. If you watch the introductory, I guess you call it a press conference, but it was really a Zoom press conference. Sark talked a lot about, look, man, I made a ton of mistakes when I was the head coach at Washington and at USC. And the one thing I've learned since then, the one thing I've learned while working in the NFL, the one thing I've learned talking to Nick Saban and working for Nick Saban is the idea that, I got to delegate, and I can't do this all by myself, and I can't run a program like Texas without hiring really, really, really smart people around me, putting it on the coaching staff, putting it on the players, putting it on the support staff. And so I think Steve Sarkisian gets it. I think he understands he can't be the guy that he was at USC, and I really do think that he has learned from Nick Saban. And I would say on top of that, I think that's a factor too. Listen, I know we all joke about like the Nick Saban rehab tour, and I use rehab loosely, and I hope people understand I'm not making fun of Sark when I say that, but like that's a real thing in college football. Well, look at what Nick Saban has done for a lot of these guys. I mean, Lane Kiffin, yeah, he's still a little goofy and says some stuff that he shouldn't sometimes. That guy had a really good first year at Ole Miss, all things considered. Mike Locksley at Maryland's doing pretty well for himself, all things considered, after making a pit stop at Alabama. You go on and on down the list. Butch Jones, we'll see what he does. But Butch Jones got off the radar for a few years, ended up at Alabama. Charlie Strong is there now. So we'll see. But I do think he learned from Nick Saban, and I do think he is the kind of guy that Texas needs. I think he's a guy that's going to hire smart people on his staff, and I think he's a guy that's going to bring a style that is going to be attractive to recruits, not only in the state of Texas, but wherever, to make Texas a nationally relevant program. Now, I know in day one, hour one, minute one, he's not going to have the talent that he just had at Alabama with Devontae Smith and Najee Harris and all those guys. But, man, there's plenty of talent in Texas. And when you can put on film and you can show them all the ways that you used all those players, all the points that you put up, how dynamic the offense was, I think the guy is going to be pretty appealing to high school recruits. I think he'll be smart enough, too, to basically hand the defense to somebody else the way that Ryan Day has at Ohio State, the way that Lincoln Riley has at Oklahoma. And so I think, again, when you're trying to find a guy that can compete with Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, I think he's the guy. I think he's young. I think he's energetic. I think he's going to recruit well. And, of course, it does matter who he hires and all that stuff, but I think he knows what his limitations are, and he also knows what his strengths are. And I do think that's important when you look at this job and you look at how Steve Sarkisian fits in. So I'll just tell you this. I'm really excited. Listen, I'm old enough to remember when Texas was actually really good and when Texas-Oklahoma was a real rivalry. And I think Steve Sarkisian is the guy that can get Texas there. And it won't happen overnight. But what I would also say, one of the other reasons why maybe you get rid of Tom Herman, it's not like the Big 12 is that good at right now. I mean, think about it. Baylor is way down under Dave Aranda year one. Not his fault, but I'm just saying. Texas Tech is terrible. They were talking to Texas Tech. They were talking about bringing back Art Briles to that program. They were so bad this offseason. TCU is down. Oklahoma State feels like it's trending in the wrong direction. And so if you can just get by Oklahoma, you can compete for the playoffs. Now, I'm not saying that's easy, but I do think Sark is the guy that can get them to that level. And I do think it's going to be fascinating to see going forward because I think for the first time in a long time, Texas has a chance to be relevant. And I do think that he is the guy that in theory can get him there. Will it happen? Who knows? But I do think it can happen. All right, I think that's it for this.